Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm alive, thank you. How are you?
Oh, alive. Good. Pleased to hear it. I'd hate to be podcasting with a dead person.
Yes, we don't quite manage from beyond the grave just yet.
No, but we are having a bit of a competition to see who can get there first.
Yeah, well, you know.
Dear listener, you might not have seen much of a gap between this and the episode on Ticket to Ride, but for us there has been a 3-month gap whilst all sorts of personal disasters and emergencies have occurred, and my good friend JG has been battling against Tory cuts to the NHS in order to get a decent diagnosis of old age or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think that pretty much covers it all. But yes, I have been little under the weather of late. Happy to say that the NHS, unable to cope with the mere thought of this podcast coming to an end, have rallied around, got me back on my feet, and we're ready to return with a song that I think it's fair to say is exactly the kind of rip-roaring, exciting number that you want to restart your podcast with after an enforced hiatus.
Well, can I just say, in sort of twee, inconsequential nonsense at this point, no, it isn't. What are you talking about?
Yeah, okay, that was bollocks. I was lying.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Which I suppose is what we have to talk about this week. It
No,
was
it isn't. All I'm going to do
no,
today is
it
say,
is.
no, it isn't, and yes, it is. And
Okay.
you're only one step away from it's behind you.
God, is this going to be the panto episode of Stuffology?
Well, we do have to talk about this song because we have committed ourselves to doing so, lest we decide to use our imagination and do something different. But this is the format that somehow we decided back in 2010 when we started. So we are going to stick to it. And this is actually quite interesting because it is a song that some people really, really like and some people don't. So I'd be interested to know where you fit in those two diametrically opposed categories.
I'm not particularly struck on it, truth be told. I think as Beatles B-sides go, it is a very minor entry. That's not to say that there isn't anything to talk about and that there's nothing to say about it, but I have a sneaking feeling, and please feel free to disagree with me if you find this to be an unfair judgment on certain sections of fandom, not just Beatles fandom, but fandom in general. I suspect that the long scarcity of this song may in some way be a justification for people's affections for it rather than necessarily because of its content. It's
Do you
much easier to say, oh, I love this song that you definitely haven't heard, but I've heard because I'm
ah
super special and you know, and okay, that rarity is no longer a thing. It's on Spotify. It's not hard to track down now, but it's still by Beatles standards a fairly obscure B-side, and people love reveling in the I've heard this and you haven't sort of paradigm.
but it's very Beatles TM, isn't it? In the sense
Oh
that
yeah.
if you put down 100 people for in an episode of Pointless or Family Feud for you American Family Fortunes for us Brits, and said name something associated with the Beatles, then harmonies are going to figure pretty high on that list. You're not going to get a on that, are you, for your Family Feud fans? But actually, there's harmonies and there's harmonies. I can see why people go, "Oh, isn't the harmonizing good?" Because there is some technically proficient harmonizing going on that they spent several hours working on in the studio. But then, by the way, today's date is Saturday, the 11th of May. For those people who've been slavering over Let It Be, the finally released film after 50 years, etc., 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 there are plenty of examples in those recording sessions of the Beatles doing the kind of harmonies that I like. So, Two of Us, for example, I think is an example where Lennon and McCartney harmonise incredibly well. And if you want a slightly different example of how two voices can work together, well, then the counterpoint melodies of I've Got a Feeling are really stunning. This, to me, is the kind of harmonising that makes it sound as though it's an outtake from the Back to the Future soundtrack.
Yeah, that's not an unfair judgment. Well, I mean, it sounds like barbershop. It's as simple as that. It's technically proficient, but I don't really have any investment in
Yeah.
technical proficiency.
Yeah.
I, I never have had. It's not something I really care about. And so, well done. You have successfully recorded a technically proficient backing vocal, but that is not a synonym for really good backing
Okay, can
vocal.
we can we can we just can we just sort of clarify here? What we're not talking about is amateurish levels or incompetence in terms of musicianship or harmonization.
Oh no, of
But
course.
I think what we're talking about, not that I want to do that. Here's what I think you mean by that. It it's noticeably proficient. It's like almost a showing off level of
Yes.
proficiency, as opposed to that sort of thing that you don't notice. It's so good that you don't notice it, or that it's different, it's quirky, but it's really good. But it's like I often talk about with Lennon singing, and I don't necessarily always like technically proficient singers, Billy Bragg, etc., Bob Dylan, etc., etc., etc. Michael Stipe to an extent as well. So it's not that I'm half seeking perfection. But yeah, this is yeah. I suspect this was George Martin in the studio. I'm really down on George Martin in recent episodes, even though we haven't recorded one in 3 months. I just seem to have been really down on George Martin. I'm not. I'm
You
not.
stick to your guns.
I think
Nobody's
it's
going to
just the
take it
way that I
away
said
from
it.
you.
It's just George Martin in the studio saying, "Come on, lads, let's do it again." I think, okay, right. So you've managed to knock out the basic rhythm track quite quickly. Let's have a go at doing something different with the vocals. And you remember that other song that you did that people quite liked, where you did this sort of thing. Let's try and do that, only in a slightly different way, so that in 70 years' time, people on the internet, in chat room forums, can go absolutely bananas over how beautiful it sounds. That's what I think George said, word for word.
Yeah, that sounds like the sort of thing that George Martin would doubtless say. It's one of those ones that I think I don't really like the production in this song, so I'm going to kind of join you on the criticism here. And why I say that is I think the production in this kind of swamps it a bit. It's a bit, I don't know, choked maybe, or a bit kind of not claustrophobic. That's not quite the right word either. But there's something about the dynamic of the way that it's produced that makes it sound a bit squashed. There's a version of this song on Anthology 2, which is almost a full minute shorter, and it's much. I much prefer it to the actual B side because it's lighter and there's a little bit more space to breathe. It also it's a minute shorter, so that's no bad thing when it comes to this song. But it just feels more natural. The backing vocals are still there; they are still impressive, but they don't feel like they're kind of crushing the life out of the song. Even George's like volume controlled guitar, which has got that nice sort of keening edge to it, which is lovely. It's a nice sound, but it's a bit stuffy in the actual B side, and it's a bit looser in the anthology version. And Lennon kind of buggers up the lyrics, so that's clear. It's very clear why the anthology version is there and the other version isn't. But it's kind of a shame. It feels a bit more open. Whereas there's something almost oppressive about the way that the B side is produced, and I think it saps a lot of potential from the song.
I don't like the guitar.
Fair enough.
It's a bit plinky plonky for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's not unfair. But well, I mean, you've got the classical guitar, and then you've got the sort of keening lead guitar. And neither of them are that distinguished. Great. I mean, it's interesting to hear a volume pedal on a Beatles song. I think that's a first, if I'm not mistaken. But beyond that, it's not the most effective use it will ever have. It's
It
fine.
sort of reminds me of, I mean, it comes before, but it sort of reminds me of about a year, 2 years before. There's a Buffalo Springfield song. I think it's For What It's Worth, and it does that has a similar kind of background, plinky plonky kind of guitar bit. Um, but I think it's done a little bit more effectively on that, possibly because the song is considerably better. And they're not making it a value judgment between George Harrison and Stephen Stills and Neil Young. That's not the point at all. But it's their big hit as opposed to a B-side recorded quite quickly. So you'd expect there to be a little bit more investment in it, but it's just a bit weedy. And in fact, to be honest, the whole thing is a bit weedy. And okay, so it's good, it's proficient, it's interesting, yeah, la la, fine, but it's just a bit kind of weedy. There's so much of this song where I just sort of think, well, perhaps if you sang it as a main line without the harmony, it might have a little bit more feeling. But as it is, it's like you've got to get the backup of your mates to help you out here because you're really annoyed that this girl doesn't like you anymore and you're stuck with this other person that you hope isn't going to remind you of the one that you don't have anymore. Just think, get over it, move on, come on. Start writing about more interesting things, please.
Yeah, it's not a generous lyric, is it?
It's
It's
awful.
pretty.
It's a lyric that thinks it's clever, but really it isn't. You know,
It's trying to be something it's not. It's reaching for Dylan. It's reaching for something where you can, you know, broaden out the scope of what it is you're writing about. But I don't think it really lands. You can. I think if I had to pick a word to describe the lyric, it would probably be immature. But I don't mean that in. I don't mean that. Well, it's what I was going to say. I
I
don't
was
mean
going
that
for
as in
teenage, but yeah, yeah.
teenage. Okay, I feel we may be in the same neck of the woods for this then. But I think it is immature in the sense that it is a style of lyric that Lennon has not yet matured into being able to write
Yes.
well. And we'll see further examples of this when we start talking about Help and going through the tracks on
Yes.
that album. But it is in the proper sense, it is immature. He's starting something here and maybe having his first attempt to write in this style sort of tucked away as a B-side is fine because this would be a bit of a shame to have in an album somewhere. It's nice that it's visible, but it's not doing it.
What is it then that he's doing differently here to some of those other lyrics like the oh I'm standing here in my raincoat outside your apartment looking in and you're having too much fun with another man sort of type of lyric that he's written dozens of times already in his short life.
I think he's picked a focus. Now, I wouldn't like to necessarily say it was a great focus, but I think he's picked a focus, and this idea of the red and the scarlet being worn, and it's reaching for some kind of imagery. I think that sounded so much better in my head, but I think it's reaching for some kind of imagery, something that you can latch on. Like a very kind of, it's a very visual sort of way of writing the lyric. A lot of that kind of I'm standing here and you're inside and we're not happy and you're in a house and something is going on. All that kind of stuff. It's not that there's no imagery in it. Obviously there is, but it's very kind of generic. I'm in the street all alone and it's raining. Boo hoo hoo for me. That's Scarlet. It has a vividness. I'm being such a dick today. I'm so sorry. I've been away for 3 months. I've got so much to get out of my system. But that vividness to the scarlet and the red, like that's a striking image. And I don't think it's successful here, but I can see what he's trying to move on to. He's trying to find a focal point or something which can like latch in the mind in a way that a lot of those kind of generic boo hoo hoo nobody loves me songs don't really have.
I think they're lyrics that think they're clever, but they're not. Now the key question then is that my fault or is it their fault? You know, is it just because
I have an answer to
perhaps,
that question.
well, yeah, okay. I think let's not do any both sidesism.
No,
Um,
it's their fault. I'm not. There's no both sides going
no,
on.
no, but I mean, my fault in the sense that they had probably heard, say, 500 different songs, a lot of which would have very, very similar lyrics. In the year 2024, we would have heard tens of thousands of different songs potentially. Um, and but just that whole kind of, look at what she could have won lyric, and the you'll do, but I really want her, so don't do anything to remind me of her. and you chuck in the red, the scarlet, and the blue references, I do just think, ugh, because, just in case you weren't sure, red means angry. Scarlet, might mean that she cheated on him, and blue means sad.
This is why I'm
Yeah,
sticking. This is why I'm
it's not
sticking to the immature description of this song.
it's not great levels of
No,
sophistication, but then how many examples of levels of sophistication are they meant to have seen so far? So I don't know if I'm trying to give them a pass or not. Basically, um, it's a kind of shrug your shoulders and go, get a move on, and write something better.
I think this is the start of the process, and as long as it's viewed in that way, then I think that's fine. This is the start of the process that's going to end up leading to much more kind of vivid imagery in the way that Lennon can play around with that. Obviously we'll get on to plenty of examples of that going forward, but it's the beginning, and yeah, I can't wait until we move on to songs which are a bit more challenging and interesting than this one. But it's interesting to see the origin story.
Even later on, though, he can still be a bit wank. I
Well,
mean, I'm sort
sure.
of thinking again, with this is the week of Let It Be and Jai Guru Deva, and everybody had a wet dream and go, yeah, sure, John, okay, godlike status. Don't question it. It's godlike status. It's genius,
Mm.
genius. Can't say anything. It's almost got Taylor Swift levels of fandom. Does our John?
Yeah, well, no, there's a no, no, God, let's not go
No,
down that
no,
line.
move on, move on,
No,
move
yeah,
on, move
yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah,
move
yeah.
on,
Well,
move on, move
there's
on.
nothing to see here. We love you, Swifties. I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. What the hell am I talking about?
It's fine.
Right.
It's fine. You're not meant to.
No, that's fine. I'm very much not the target audience. And I'm
Well,
not. I'm
maybe the odd demographic that fits, but
one or two. Yeah. So-
so what I find interesting about it, so I made kind of the reference to the Back to the Future soundtrack, and I'm sort of thinking of that. This the stuff that the band are playing at the dance before Marty McFly gets upstage and makes it all rock and roll and that sort of thing.
oh, the Beneath
Um,
the Sea school prom thing.
yeah, that's it. The Earth Angel
Yeah.
type thing. Because it's retro, but it's retro in 1965. So I don't know how retro you can call it, but it's so retro that you'd almost expect it to be McCartney, but it's not. And it's going to sound like I'm really picking on John Lennon this episode. Remember, he was the one that did the rock and roll album in the 70s, contractual fulfillment, admittedly. So it's quite interesting just how backward looking he can be at times.
I mean, this is definitely a genre exercise, but I don't think it's straight pastiche of kind of doo wop. I mean, a lot of we haven't really talked about the sort of musical side of things, and I'm happy not to go into too much detail about that. Not why do I sound so rude this week? I'm not even swearing that much. But I don't know that much about doo wop. It's not really my favorite genre. But even I'm aware that the way that these four chord structures are going together is kind of following that pattern. But it's not straight pastiche in the way that I'm trying to think of a good McCartney pastiche at this point. I'm all going to think of When I'm 64 now, but that's too far in the future. I don't know.
Only 2 years.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
thought. Yeah. But it's like McCartney's pastiches of styles tend to be tend to be played much straighter. This has elements of doo-wop in it, but you wouldn't mistake this. So like, there's been so many kind of like Black American girl group songs that the Beatles have covered,
Yeah.
but at this stage, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't mistake this song for one of them because it's not following that kind of template, even although it's using similar kind of structures. It does have elements which are pulling it in different directions. Again, not least of which is that volume pedal guitar. Even if you're not a big fan of it, it does help to separate it out. It just doesn't sound like a Please Mr. Postman. Somehow, still our most listened to episode. Everyone, it's not that kind of or Chains or one of those kind of songs. It's not that kind of a piece. So whilst it lies alongside them, again, it's kind of interesting to see Lennon using a song which, like you said, is definitely retro in 1964, but which isn't just a straight take on it.
I I think that the issue I mean, I can enjoy lots of different types of Beatles music. I just find the juxtaposition between the writing and recording of Ticket to Ride and this to be too jarring for me.
No, that's definitely true.
And then even the fact that we're only a couple of months away from the recording of Help as well. That and we have said this in other episodes. They're making such strides forward with this that this kind of song just feels a bit too safe and a bit too straightforward and knowingly obvious for such a talented and innovative group of people. There you go. See, I'm trying to say lots of positive things as well. It's just this song that's just a bit kind of meh.
Do you think it shows a slight lack of confidence that people will be taken along in that journey, that they still feel the need to have a song like this in the catalogue when they've literally just done Ticket to Ride and moved so much further forward in that one song than they have here? Or do you think it's just the way that those things overlap?
Well, I'd be interested to know if when they've put a song like Ticket to Ride to bed, they do have that, updated conversation of you've just recorded another number one smash, or whether there is that nervousness in terms of will our fans like it? So let's do the fan service type material. So there's something for them to get their teeth into. But then the other argument is, of course, that they were recording things on albums that were almost seemed to be appealing to different audiences anyway. There was always that theory, isn't there, that there are some songs that they record, for the mums, for the mums and dads, so that they can listen and like the Beatles as well. Whether that's a deliberate strategy or not, I don't know. But the old McCartney show tunes, on the first couple of albums, so sort of let's go back and take something from this old show that no one remembers. So I mean, there could be lots of different reasons for doing it, and I'm not going to profess to know how they were feeling in the studio, because I know McCartney doesn't like that. I've seen him sort of say, "How does someone else know what exactly went on in the studio?" Fine, I don't know. I'm just guessing, Paul. But I'm guessing that after you recorded Yes It Is, you weren't all sitting around going, "That's a million seller."
Well, I mean, ironically, of course, being in the back of Ticket to Ride, it kind of is,
Yeah, I've
but
seen,
not on its own merits.
I've seen people talk about this dissonant harmony as well, and about how that's a really innovative and mature thing. And I think our old friend Ian MacDonald talks about sort of emotional depth of this, and this is where I will return to my bingo card refrain of about how emotional responses to popular music are very much subjective, because I just think, what are they on about? What are they talking about? Dissonant harmony is not necessarily a good thing. Just ask all those people that like to try and listen to very modern classical music. And, just McDonald talking about emotional depth. Okay, that's fine, but I'd hate to think what was going on in your head at the time you wrote that.
Yeah, I must admit, I listened to the song before doing any reading about it because I basically didn't remember it. And I mostly just thought, wow, they really didn't put a lot of effort into this, did they? They can't even sing on key. And then I read, oh, it's actually it's actually this intentional dissonant harmony. I thought, yeah, but it just still sounds like they can't sing it very well. Again, because you've done a dissonant harmony doesn't necessarily mean it's been done tremendously successfully. Now, I don't have a great singing voice. I am the very first person to admit that, and I'm sure I could never come close to being able to achieve the technical ability to be able to deliver that sort of close three-part dissonant harmony. But also, I'm fine with that.
But see, in my head, I'm very much a layperson when it comes to this. Dissonant harmony just feels like an oxymoron.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But I think in a way it kind of almost ties in with what you were saying about the lyric, which is it's trying to be clever, but it's not really. And I suspect that might kind of be the case with the dissonant harmony as well. It's trying to be really smart. Yeah, no.
And this could be, listener, you can get away with this, depends on what JG follows up with. It could be that as they get more mature, they get better at this kind of thing, and then there are better examples of it to come.
Are you suggesting that they're getting better all the time?
Oh, it couldn't get much worse.
Well, okay, excellent. Right, we not even remotely scripted. Can you tell? Andrew, I have some good news for you.
We finished?
Well, yeah, we've been talking for 25 minutes, so we're over our threshold. We can
Ooh,
wrap.
okay, that's fair. Can I just at this point I just want to chuck something in because
Mm.
in the last episode that we recorded months and months and months ago, I talked about how I had started listening to the Waterboys again, particularly early Waterboys, and World Party, and talked about the how much I was enjoying listening to Carl Wallinger again, and forgotten just how good he was. Well, of course, a few weeks after came the news that Carl Wallinger died, and we haven't had a chance to talk about it. Now, I know on some of your favorite Beatles podcasts, they talk about the sad passing of people who were linked in some way to the Beatles, and so on and so forth. And obviously, those things are very sad for the families. But I tend to focus more on the deaths that have that sort of meaning, that resonance with me. So like Shane MacGowan and Terry Hall, for example. But yeah, I was the Carl Wallinger thing was because it's another one, in the mid 60s, another one of those sort of people who influenced, inspired me in. There's a group of them, whether it's the early 80s through to the late 80s and early 90s. And there's a lot about Carl Wallinger that chimes with Beatles-esque. There was certainly with some songs there was a Beatle-esque element. And also, it's worth pointing out that in one iteration of World Party, so it's very much a one-man band for most of it, but in one iteration, he did have. I'm not going to say it's Chris Sharrock. It's another anyway. His bass player. I really annoyed myself that I didn't write it down beforehand. Was I think the original Paul McCartney in the Bootleg Beatles, and if you have a look at one or two of the videos, in particular, I think it's Is It Like Today? He's on it as well, and he's playing the. I know you pronounce it Hufner, so I'll do Hufner bass, and he's almost got the one of like the waistcoat on, and he looks like someone who would play Paul McCartney in the Bootleg Beatles. So incredibly good songwriter, underrated, and one of those people who perhaps was a bit too quirky and spiky in interviews and a bit too perhaps shy to really push himself in terms of publicity. But yeah, so that was sort of sad. And I suppose, again, I mentioned Terry Hall and Shane MacGowan, but also in recent years Mark Hollis as well. Some of those people that really touch me, but also then you have to say in their very, very different ways, you can draw lines between things that they did and things that perhaps the Beatles were responsible for in some way. Some of the lines aren't necessarily direct, but the influence will go back to them. So I just wanted to mention that.
Lovely. Well, very nice. Yeah. I don't really have anything to add to that except score, please.
4.
Thank you. Yeah, that seems fair. I'm going to go for 4 as well. Lovely. Anything else you want to add before we go?
To be honest, no.
Right. Well, that's
it's good,
pleasingly
good
unambiguous.
It's good to see you up and about and looking, looking well, and bearing in mind the amount of effort you put into actually putting this podcast out. I just turn up with a Google Doc and some doodles and say some incomprehensible nonsense from time to time. So I just want to put it on record for you to edit out that I literally couldn't and wouldn't do this without you. So don't you go dying anytime soon. We've still got several albums to get through.
Yeah, no,
You've got to stay alive for the rest of this decade at least.
I will do my best to avoid the Grim Reaper until we at least manage to get to my name, look up the number. Right, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. You can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are beatlesstuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at Beatles_ology, and we are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog, which I have been tragically unable to update despite having done absolutely sod all for the last 3 months, but it still exists at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. I will get around to doing stuff on it soon. You can also check out my other podcast if you're so inclined, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. Next week, we begin a new album, Help. But until then, keep listening.